Hello ladies and gentlemen, MarauderEX here with a rant video. I have a new camera, not the topic of the rant. It does have a little bit of weirdness to it. I'm trying to iron it out and get things working to the best of their abilities. So bear with me that it's going to be a little weird. But yeah, not the topic of the rant, just a warning. So the topic of the rant was there was a post about Octopath Traveler on Facebook, and I committed the cardinal sin of any post on social media. I read the comments. I know, my fault. There was one person in the comments making some ridiculously outlandish claims and then refusing to acknowledge any evidence refuting those claims. And I know that's just how some people are on the internet, but I wanted to take this opportunity. I'm not going to post who that person is. I'm not going to post the comment thread. But I'm going to take a moment to talk about some of the things addressed, because I see these comments show up so many places that just shows that there are a lot of people who really don't understand facets of the gaming industry. So I kind of want to touch on those. So some of the claims made, the three that I'm going to touch base on, is the original claim was that games cost, or specifically Super Nintendo games cost $50 at max at launch, and that this person was able to get, AAA titles for $15 used. Not quite the same argument. There was discussion of the graphics and how this is not a AAA game because it has PS1 graphics at best because they are sprites. And then the last argument is the cost per hour for enjoyment or entertainment. So those are the three things that I kind of want to touch base on. The first was the comment that I directly refuted because I had evidence, and I'm going to probably pop this up. Person said that $50 was the cap for a Super Nintendo game when it first launched, and that's just factually incorrect. Super Nintendo games in the United States could range on the upwards of $80. Chrono Trigger, I remember Chrono Trigger launching. I don't remember seeing its price tag, and I've not been able to find a sale paper with its particular price tag, but I would not be surprised given the amount of tech that was put into the cart for Chrono Trigger, or things like Mega Man X3 that has the Super FX chip, things like that, running $80 easily. Some of the games on the flyer that I'm going to post up, this is the flyer that I found. This is a Toys R Us sale flyer from, I think, 1995, maybe 94. It is the year that Donkey Kong Country came out, because there's a specific thing of pre-order Donkey Kong Country, and several of the games are $69.99. That's $70, and then you factor in local tax. That's gonna be pretty pricey. And then I've seen sale papers for Canada where the prices are $100 a game. And that's not even an exaggeration. $99.99 for a couple of games. That's Super Nintendo games, cartridge-based games at the time, had a lot of tech put into them, and so you were paying a lot for the manufacturing and design and I can't speak at the moment, of the particular tech. So that is a circuit board. That is a physical piece of tech. It's very different than, a disc with just data on it. It's actually got processors in it. Some of them have extra processors, like the VFX chip. Those are not cheap. So a lot of this that technology was rather expensive when it came out. These games were not always $60. And when a lot of people hate this particular argument, but it does kind of need to be said. When you factor in inflation, the fact that games have not really gone up in price. In fact, in some cases, they've gone down in price. Because again, some of these games today that, have ridiculous amount of content, ridiculous amount of graphical capability, because of the media that they're on, is so much easier to deal with. Like, these games would be over $100 if they had to be on, Super Nintendo style cartridge, where you've got tons of crap on that circuit board. Yeah, that says something, really. That the games have not really gone up in price, and that if you factor in inflation, $60 in 1995 is a lot more than $60 today. And I looked up some inflation statistics, and $60 was $80, $85 compared to today, in terms of, how much time and effort you have to spend to work in a capitalist environment to get that money for the average individual. So yeah, that says something. The second topic, I kind of want to skip over the second and move to the third, because these do kind of link up when it comes to cost, because one of the other arguments was cost per hour. Someone pointed out that Octopath Traveler, the base game, is $60, and that was what this person was taking exception to, because it's like, oh, it's too much for this type of game. But ignoring the fact that it is 60 hours worth of gameplay, on average, that is $1 per hour. That's not really bad in terms of how much you're paying for what you're getting out of it. And some people were saying a lot of those 60 hours are backtracking, grinding, etc. There were arguments saying no, not necessarily. There's a lot of content to the game, and depending on how you go about it, it could very easily be 60 hours or more without the grinding or backtracking aspects. So we're just gonna say 60 hours gameplay without backtracking or grinding. 60. That's $1 per hour. Now, going to the movies, a ticket, depending on where you go, can be anywhere between $8 and $12, and that's for a 2-hour movie. That's low end $4 an hour for an entertainment value. That's 4 times the amount of what you would get with Octopath Traveler. That should say something, right? Well, his response was, well, what if I've got $300 or 300 hours out of playing Tetris? Does that mean I should pay $300 for it? No. But if you've gotten $300 or 300 hours out of Tetris and you spent $60 on it for whatever, say you got, one of the super collections of Tetris that has every variation of Tetris that has been released today, wouldn't you say that's a good deal? 300 hours for a game that was $60? This person also talked about The Witcher, which will lead into the next topic, but saying that, this was a game that was worth $60 because of how many hours of enjoyment he got out of it. It's like, that's true. If you get a ton of enjoyment out of a game, a lot of hours spent of entertainment, then $60 is a steal, right? Compared to other forms of media, like that's a steal. So why is that a bad thing? It's only a bad thing because you're looking at it from the opposite side of the perception of it's $60 instead of the number of hours of enjoyment. And now, if you don't enjoy this type of game, that's great. Just say so. Don't make this false equivalency argument. That's just obnoxious. And the last argument, which is actually the second argument, was the AAA caliber, the graphics style. Now, I'm gonna just flat out say, artistic style does not equal graphics, and I want to make a graphic for this, and just art style doesn't equal graphics. You can have the most photorealistic looking game, but if it's the most photorealistic looking game for like a Mario game, that's gonna look really out of place. Mario looking super realistic, the same 5 o'clock shadow that I've got, that's gonna look weird, right? Like the super realism doesn't always fit this, the artistic style that the game is trying to convey. And there are many games that have a very unique artistic style that don't need the hyper-realism to it. So those two things don't equate. So, and it's very difficult to sit here and judge what a AAA game should or shouldn't be, because there's a lot of discussion on the fact that a AAA game is just going to be the highest quality of graphics, or they spend more money on marketing. There's a lot of parts of that definition. And a AAA game doesn't always necessarily mean a good game. It just means some of the effort put into it, most notably the money put into it, is the only thing that I've been able to find that kind of links all of the parts of the definition. So like it's really easy to sit here and say that, you know, indie games aren't necessarily AAA games, but they can have a AAA experience, but they may not have the budget or the marketing put in behind them. This particular argument went into that the sprite-based graphics are PS1 at best, but most notably Super Nintendo quality. Well, that's not accurate, for one, because Octopath Traveler was built on the Unreal Engine, meaning it's built on an engine that the Super Nintendo could never grasp. I would love to see someone be able to make an Unreal Engine 4 game run on Super NES. I would love to see that, because that would be a programming feat. That's just, you know, technology. But ignoring that, if we're going to just go with the artistic style is the focus, not necessarily the graphical capabilities, just the artistic style. We're going to go with the sprite-based versus 3D-based, because that was really this person's argument, that 3D games using 3D graphics are inherently superior because you can do more with them. And you can do a ton with 3D graphics, but that also doesn't negate how much effort has to go into making a sprite-based game. I just played Card Sagas Wars. I did a live stream of that, and I was blown away by the art style of it, because it's all pixel art. It's all pixel sprite animation. And what a lot of people don't tend to realize, and I talked about this during the live stream, was for every frame of animation you have to draw a different sprite. And a lot of people don't remember this time on the internet. I remember seeing like when sprite sheets started getting ripped, and people like, this is every frame of animation that Mega Man X has, for all of his, you know, all of his movement, his jumping, his special attacks, his different armor variants, like how there's a different frame for basically everything. And no one realized just how many sprites you actually had to make for that to be a thing. And then the Super NES games were running at 60 frames a second. There are a lot of Super NES games that run 60 frames a second. But now, these days, if you want 60 frames a second in HD, you want more movement. You want more frames of animation. Meaning you're going to have to make more sprite. Like, you're going to have to make each one just slightly different. Like, imagine, the best thing about it, trying to relate, is hand-drawn animation. And most of those aren't done in 60 frames per second. Most of those are done in 24 is cinematic. And then, you know, 30 is pretty much TV standard. So imagine every second having to have 24 to 60, depending on how you're going, individual frames of animation to make 1 second of footage. For those of you who've ever done, you know, the individual, I'm blanking on the name now, the individual picture animation, kind of like what Robot Chicken does, for, you know, how they originally had to model all of the figures each second, and the kind of time lapse. I'm blanking on the name now, damn it. But that type of animation where you take an individual picture and then move, 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 and then you combine all of those pictures into one movement frame. That is basically what you have to do with sprites or hand-drawn animation. So just negating the saying, oh, it's sprite-based, it means it has nothing to do with no, technological advancements. That's a really disingenuous argument to make. So there's a lot to these particular arguments, and it's frustrating because there are a lot of people who really don't realize mostly artistic style does not equal graphics. The cost of games does not always equal the amount of effort put into it, or the amount of money put into it, or the amount of enjoyment you're necessarily going to get out of it. Like, you can spend $60 on a game you hate, and if you only play it for an hour, then yeah, you're not getting a lot out of that. But if you do get enjoyment out of it, or at least enough enjoyment to finish the game, depending on how many hours you put into it, that's per hour probably going to be a really good investment in terms of entertainment. But a lot of people don't look at it that way. And then there's the argument about AAA games, and that's a completely insane argument in its own right. I could probably do a video series on AAA games as an industry and still not even scratch the surface. So, like, just because it's a AAA game or not a AAA game, especially in your opinion, because that's the thing, there's no gold standard, there's no defined characteristics for what is a AAA game. I've not been able to find a criteria checklist of what defines a AAA game. So a lot of it's going to be subjective. A lot of it's going to be based off publisher, developer, marketing, money put into it. There's a lot of things that are going to be like, well, if it's a relatively unknown company, but they put, $100 million into development of this game, does that mean it's not a AAA game, or does that mean it's an indie game? Who knows? That's a really hard argument to make. The easier argument to make, and the argument that I would much prefer to see people make, is if you don't enjoy the game, or the game doesn't seem to be your cup of tea, just say so. Just say, yeah, no, I'm not really all that interested in it. Not really my thing. It's like, I don't really lean toward first-person shooters. I don't really lean toward third-person shooters. There are a lot of games that I don't typically lean towards. I don't sit here and say that this is a terrible game because I don't like it. I'll say it's a game that doesn't interest me. It's a game that doesn't entertain me. I'm not going to say that it's not worth whatever people are paying for it, because if people are paying something for it, that's apparently what it's worth. That's how things work. But I'm not going to sit here and say, the newest iteration of Call of Duty is not worth $60 because, it's not different enough from the previous iteration of Call of Duty. I don't know what actually went into the development of the game. They could be using a brand new engine. They could have changed so much coding behind the scenes that I'll never be able to notice that maybe it is worth $60, simply because that's the amount of work put into it. I don't know. I can say it doesn't look any different from a player's perspective, and so therefore it doesn't really interest me. But I'm not going to say it's not worth it. I'm going to say it's not interesting to me. And that's the thing. Like, if you can't sit here and say that, it's that your opinion, it's just affects you, and that, your opinion is your opinion and not necessarily, a gospel. Because, you may not believe the Octopath Traveler is worth $60. That's your call. I believe it was worth $90 because I bought the special edition. Like, does that mean I'm wrong? Well, to you, yes, but to me, no. Because I have greatly enjoyed what I've played of the game. I love all of the extra things that came with the game. Definitely worth the $30 extra and the price difference between just the game and the collector's edition. But, if I couldn't get the collector's edition, yeah, $60 is a fantastic investment for how much enjoyment I'm going to get out of that game. I don't think I'm wrong. You may think I'm wrong, but yeah. So yeah, that's really been my argument on this, my rant, because it's just one of those things that a lot of people just not paying attention to a lot of things. Game prices in the industry throughout history, artistic style versus graphics, and what constitutes a AAA game. These are all things that, it's not necessarily a black and white, cut and dry type thing. I mean, the prices throughout history, that is pretty cut and dry. Like, we have a lot of evidence proving one way or the other. Doesn't mean that, a game that launched at $60 was, it stayed at $60. Maybe the game flopped hardcore and people didn't like it, so it instantly became a bargain bin title. But at launch, that was what it was. So that's a thing. So yeah, there's just a lot to it in terms of gaming that I kind of wanted to rant about because people seem to enjoy the rants. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these topics because there's a lot to it. There's a lot of history and there's a lot of opinion here. And I'm not going to say any one opinion is right or wrong. Opinion is opinion. Opinions are like assholes. Everyone's got one. Just, as long as you don't try to shove it in someone's face, that's the thing. And I will ask that anyone that has differing opinions in the comments, either with myself or with other commenters, to keep it civil. If you can't keep it civil, I'm not gonna give people a platform to act like assholes. Or show that they're assholes on other people's faces. Not something on YouTube. Not a thing. You don't need to go shoving your asshole in other people's face on YouTube. I'm sure there are community guideline standards for that. So, with that, I will see you in whatever topic brings up the next rant. Lord only knows it's only a matter of time before that happens. So till then, later everyone.